The sun was dipping low behind the endless stretch of dry hills, casting the worn fields in a somber golden haze. Dust stirred lazily with the faintest touch of the evening breeze. On the outskirts of the forgotten town of Merrill Creek, an old man wrestled with a stubborn tractor that hadn't worked right in years. Amos Carter spat into the dirt, wiped his gnarled hands on faded denim, and muttered a curse under his breath. Nothing seemed to listen to him anymore. Not machines, not the fields, and certainly not time. He leaned back, surveying the cracked earth around him. Once, these fields had been green and forgiving, bending under the weight of wheat and clover. Now they bore nothing but brittle weeds, and Amos's own stubborn refusal to leave. The townsfolk had long since given up on Merrill Creek, and maybe, Amos thought bitterly, they were smarter than he was. A sharp snort cut through the heavy air. Amos straightened, squinting toward the far edge of the field where a streak of movement caught his eye. Wild horses roamed these parts, lean survivors with fire in their veins. He should have known better than to leave the northern fence broken. A slender figure broke free from the scrub, its coat a dusty swirl of white and gray, muscles coiled and twitching under the fading light. A Mustang. It wasn't alone. A dozen others lingered just beyond the fence line, the shapes ghosting through the dying light like spirits. But this one was different. Younger, Amos guessed. Reckless. It darted across the field, hooves striking the earth with a defiant rhythm, closer and closer to where Amos's old truck sat idling crookedly in the dirt. He cursed again, louder this time. Wild horses meant ruined fences, trampled seedlings, what little he had left. Without thinking, Amos grabbed the long wooden pole he kept leaning against the tractor and waved it over his head. "Get," he barked, his voice cracking with effort and rage. "Go on now." The Mustang didn't flinch. It threw its head high, snorting defiantly, pawing the ground like some ancient warrior, sizing up a tired old man. Amos's heart thudded harder than it should have. His knees, brittle as winter branches, protested as he stepped forward, shouting louder. The other horses shifted nervously, uncertain, but the gray Mustang didn't back down. It charged. Amos barely had time to lift the pole. He swung clumsily, a desperate, defensive motion, and with a sickening crack, the wood struck the Mustang across its shoulder. The sound echoed across the empty field. The horse skidded, stumbled, then crashed to the ground in a cloud of choking dust. The other Mustangs whinnied and bolted, vanishing into the gathering dusk, leaving the wounded one behind. Amos stood frozen, the pole hanging limply from his fingers, a cold weight settling in his chest. What had he done? The Mustang struggled, its legs scrambling against the earth, but it couldn't rise. It let out a low, trembling sound that sliced through Amos more sharply than any blade ever could. For a moment, the old farmer thought about turning away, pretending he hadn't seen, hadn't caused this. Lord knew he'd spent a lifetime pretending things were fine when they weren't. But his boots stayed rooted to the ground. Amos staggered forward, dropping the pole, his hands held out in an awkward, clumsy peace offering. The Mustang's eyes, wide, dark, terrified, locked onto his, and in them, Amos saw something raw and terrible. Pain, yes. Fear. But something else too. A wild, desperate will to live that he hadn't seen in a long, long time. He knelt beside the fallen animal, every bone in his body groaning in protest. Up close, the Mustang's coat shimmered with sweat and dust, the white and gray blending like a storm cloud barely contained. Blood trickled from a shallow gash where the pole had struck. Amos reached out slowly, his hand trembling not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of guilt pressing down on him. His fingertips brushed the Mustang's flank, and though the animal flinched, it didn't lash out. It didn't bolt. It simply lay there, breathing raggedly, watching him. "I didn't mean to," Amos whispered, his voice breaking on the words. "I swear it. I didn't know what else to do." The Mustang blinked a slow, exhausted motion. Amos pressed his lips together, fighting back a tide of emotion he hadn't let himself feel in years. He knew pain. He knew what it meant to be left broken in the dust, while the world moved on without you. He pushed himself to his feet, glancing back toward his truck. He had a length of rope, some old blankets. Maybe he could make a sling, load the horse into the truck bed. It wasn't a good plan, but it was the only one he had. The Mustang tried again to rise, and again it collapsed, letting out a helpless grunt. That sound lodged itself in Amos's chest like a buried nail. "Hold on," he murmured, as much to himself as to the horse. "Just hold on." The rope was rough and frayed, the blankets moth-eaten and thin, but Amos worked with the grim determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. The Mustang watched him with wary eyes, every muscle taut with pain and instinct, but it didn't resist when Amos slipped the rope loosely around its body, speaking in low, steady tones. "Easy now. Ain't nobody gonna hurt you no more." It took 3 tries, and every ounce of strength he had left to get the Mustang onto the truck bed. By the time Amos climbed into the cab, his shirt was soaked with sweat, and his hands were bleeding from 100 tiny cuts. He cranked the engine with a silent prayer, and to his surprise, the old truck coughed to life. Amos drove slow, every bump and jolt eliciting soft, broken noises from the Mustang. He gritted his teeth against the guilt gnawing at him. The nearest vet was 2 towns over, and Amos knew he didn't have the money to pay for whatever care the horse needed. Hell, he barely had enough to keep himself fed most days. He turned off the main road before he could second-guess himself, steering the truck toward his dilapidated barn. It leaned precariously, a skeleton of what it once had been, but it would offer shelter. It would have to be enough. The truck bumped to a stop beside the barn. Amos climbed out and stood there for a long moment, staring up at the cracked beams and sagging roof. He thought about the life he'd tried so hard to hold on to. The farm, the land, the stubborn pride that had kept him from asking for help even when he needed it most. It had all crumbled around him, just like this barn, just like himself. With a weary sigh, he moved to the truck bed, speaking softly as he approached the injured Mustang. "You ain't got much choice, fella," he said. "Neither do I." He fashioned a crude sling from the rope and blankets, easing the Mustang down inch by inch. The horse stumbled but remained standing, its legs trembling beneath its weight. Amos steadied it, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle. Together, man and Mustang limped into the barn, 2 broken souls bound by circumstance, and a wound too deep for either to ignore. Inside, the musty smell of hay and old wood filled the air. Amos guided the Mustang into a makeshift stall and collapsed onto a nearby bale, his chest heaving. He watched as the Mustang sank slowly to its knees, exhausted but alive. Alive. Amos pulled off his hat, rubbing a hand over his bald scalp. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know how to fix what he'd broken. But he knew one thing. He wasn't about to turn his back on the Mustang. Not now. Outside, the last light of day faded into darkness, and in the quiet of the barn, something small but undeniable shifted between the old farmer and the wild horse. A fragile thread of something like trust, stretched thin but unbroken. It was the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. Morning seeped into the barn like a cautious visitor, shafts of pale light creeping across the battered floorboards. Amos Carter woke with a start, his body aching from the awkward angle he'd slept in. For a moment, confusion clung to him like cobwebs. Then he heard it, the soft, unsteady rustling from the stall. The Mustang. Amos pushed himself upright, grimacing as his joints protested. He rose and crossed the barn slowly, his boots scuffing against the dirt-packed floor. The horse was awake, its flanks rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. Its eyes followed Amos, wide but less wild than before, as if uncertainty was warring with instinct. Amos crouched just outside the stall, not daring to step inside yet. Last night's fragile truce could shatter with one wrong move. He studied the animal in the muted light. The wound on its shoulder had dried into an angry, crusted line. The Mustang had managed to stand, but it kept its weight off the injured leg, trembling slightly with the effort. "You're a tough one," Amos said softly, almost in wonder. The horse flicked an ear but didn't shy away. He rose and rummaged through a cabinet that sagged against the wall. He found an old tin of antiseptic cream, some clean rags, and a rusty pair of scissors. He didn't have much, but he had enough to try. He worked methodically, cutting the rags into makeshift bandages, boiling water over a small camp stove to clean the wound. The Mustang watched every movement with the wary suspicion of a creature used to betrayal. Amos approached slowly, murmuring nonsense words meant more to soothe himself than the horse. When he reached out with the damp cloth, the Mustang tensed, muscles rippling under its battered hide. Amos froze, hand hovering inches away. "Not gonna hurt you," he whispered. "Not anymore." The Mustang's nostrils flared, but it stayed put. Amos dabbed gently at the wound, cleaning away the dried blood and dirt. The horse flinched once, twice, but didn't strike. When Amos finally spread the antiseptic cream and wrapped the bandage snugly around the injured shoulder, a strange swell of pride warmed his chest. Maybe he wasn't as useless as he thought. He stepped back, giving the Mustang space. The horse shifted uneasily, testing the new dressing, but it didn't bolt or fight. That simple act of trust, it floored Amos more than any blow ever could. He sank back onto his bale of hay and rubbed his tired eyes. Outside, the farm stretched wide and empty, the fields gasping for rain that would never come. Bills piled on the cracked kitchen table inside the house. A foreclosure notice lay buried under a newspaper he hadn't dared open. He was running out of time, out of everything. The Mustang snorted softly, and Amos looked up. The horse was staring at him, head slightly tilted, as if studying him in return. Amos chuckled under his breath. "What? You think I got a plan," he said. "I'm just winging it, same as you." The sound of his own voice filled the empty barn. It had been a long time since Amos had spoken to anyone without the stiff politeness he used at the feed store or the bank. He realized he missed conversation, even if it was one-sided. He pushed himself up, groaning, and fetched a battered bucket. He filled it from the rain barrel outside, offering it to the Mustang. The horse sniffed cautiously, then dipped its head to drink. Watching it, Amos felt an odd, stubborn flicker of hope. Maybe saving the horse was saving a part of himself too. By noon, the Mustang managed a few steps within the stall, favoring its injured leg, but moving with determined grace. Amos decided to name it, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe because a nameless creature was too easy to forget. "Storm," he said aloud. It suited the horse's gray, swirling coat, the wildness still burning behind those dark eyes. "Storm it is," he said, nodding to himself. The day wore on. Amos repaired a broken section of the stall, hammered a few new nails into the barn door. Storm watched him with quiet vigilance. When Amos worked near the stall, the horse didn't shrink away anymore. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. As twilight bled across the sky, Amos sat again on the bale, feeling the deep ache of labor in his bones, a familiar, almost comforting pain. He talked while he worked, letting the words tumble out. "Used to be a time I thought I had it all figured out. This farm, it was my father's and his. Fathers before him. Thought I'd pass it on someday. Thought there'd be someone to take it." He laughed bitterly. Funny how things turn out. Storm shifted, one ear twitching toward the sound of his voice. "Lost my boy," Amos said, the words sticking in his throat. "War took him. Took his mama, too, in a way. She never came back from that funeral." He stared at the dirt floor, the silence pressing down heavy. "Just me now. Just this place and all the ghosts it's got." Storm stepped closer to the edge of the stall. Amos noticed but didn't move. He stayed still, letting the Mustang set the terms. The horse extended its neck cautiously, nostrils flaring. Amos lifted his hand slowly. Storm's muzzle brushed against his fingers, featherlight and trembling. Amos held his breath, feeling the tentative connection between them like a thread strung taut. He didn't try to grab or hold. He just stayed, offering his presence. In that moment, something shifted. The barn, the broken farm, the years of loneliness, all of it faded into the background. There was only the old man and the wounded horse, two survivors bound by wounds too deep for words. Storm withdrew after a moment, retreating into the stall shadows, but Amos didn't feel rejected. It was enough. The next morning, the work began in earnest. Amos fashioned a crude halter from old leather straps, approaching Storm with a patience he hadn't known he possessed. It took an hour just to slip the halter over the horse's head, another hour for Storm to accept the soft pressure of a lead rope. Amos didn't push. He didn't raise his voice or his hand. He moved slowly, deliberately, offering trust in small, steady doses. Storm responded with cautious acceptance, each success measured in inches rather than miles. By the end of the day, Amos had led the Mustang a few halting steps around the barnyard. Storm limped but kept moving, his spirit undimmed by the injury. Amos found himself grinning like a fool, a rare and foreign feeling warming his chest. Neighbors would think he was crazy if they saw him, a broke-down old farmer wasting his last days on a half-crippled wild horse. Let him think it. That night, Amos couldn't sleep. He lay awake listening to the soft sounds of Storm moving in the stall, the steady rhythm of breath and shifting hooves. He thought about the choices he'd made, the stubborn pride that had kept him rooted to dying land, the isolation he'd wrapped around himself like a shield. He thought about Storm, fierce and battered, refusing to give up. Maybe, Amos thought, they both deserved one more chance. Morning came with a cool breeze, and a sky brushed with pale pink. Amos stood at the barn door, the rising sun at his back, and watched Storm limp toward him with deliberate steps. He smiled. It wasn't just about saving the Mustang anymore. It was about saving himself. As Storm drew closer, Amos reached out once more, feeling the warmth of the horse's breath on his calloused palm. Trust wasn't easy. It wasn't fast. But it was there, growing slowly like a stubborn seed pushing up through dry, cracked soil. Amos wrapped his hand gently around the lead rope. "Come on, Storm," he said softly. "Let's see how far we can go." And together, they stepped into the morning light, two battered souls daring, for the first time in a long while, to hope again. Of course. Here's Section 3, exactly 1,500 words, continuing naturally from where the last section ended. Weeks passed, marked by the slow, deliberate rhythm of recovery. Storm's limp gradually lessened, and Amos's once slumped shoulders straightened a little more each day. The farm, though still sagging and desperate, seemed less oppressive with Storm's presence, threading new life through its dusty veins. Amos worked tirelessly, rebuilding the old corral with scavenged wood, fashioning a training ring out of bent wire and stubborn determination. Storm learned quickly, surprising Amos with his intelligence and resilience. There was still a wildness to him, a deep seam of defiance that surfaced when Amos pushed too hard, but beneath it lay something steadier, an unspoken agreement between two creatures who had nothing left to lose. In the evenings, after the sun slipped behind the hills and the cicadas sang their mournful songs, Amos would sit by the barn with a mug of weak coffee, watching Storm graze in the pasture. Sometimes he spoke aloud, telling stories of days gone by, stories of a young man full of dreams, a son with a laugh like summer rain, a woman whose hand smelled of lavender and bread. Storm listened, head occasionally lifting at the sound of Amos's voice, as if understanding that some memories needed witnesses. One morning, while tightening the cinch on an old saddle he'd restored, Amos caught sight of the foreclosure notice again, pinned to the doorframe by a rusty nail. His stomach clenched. Time was slipping away faster than he cared to admit. He couldn't outrun the bank with goodwill and grit alone. He needed a miracle. Storm, as if sensing his unease, nudged him with a velvet-soft nose. Amos chuckled bitterly. "You got any ideas, boy?" he asked. Later that day, while picking up feed and supplies in town, Amos overheard a conversation outside the hardware store. Two ranchers leaned against the hood of a battered pickup, talking in low, animated voices. "You hear about that horse competition over in Dry Creek?" one said. "Big prize money this year. Enough to turn a man's luck if he can win it." Amos paused, heart hammering. He edged closer, pretending to study a display of work gloves. "Got to be something special, though," the other man said. "They ain't looking for tricks or show ponies. They're looking for real heart. Horse and rider bonded. Trust." Amos's hands trembled slightly as he placed the gloves back on the rack. Dry Creek was 2 towns over, not more than a day's ride. If Storm was ready, and if Amos was brave enough, maybe they had a shot. It was a fool's hope, but Amos had learned that sometimes fools were the only ones stubborn enough to change the world. The decision was made before he even left town. The next days blurred into a whirlwind of preparation. Amos rode Storm gently but persistently, strengthening the Mustang's injured leg, building their rhythm together. Storm balked at first, the memory of pain making him skittish, but Amos never forced him. He coaxed, encouraged, waited. Trust grew between them like a carefully tended fire. On the eve of the competition, Amos loaded Storm into a borrowed trailer, the old truck coughing and sputtering as it climbed the dusty road toward Dry Creek. His heart lodged in his throat the entire way, doubts gnawing at him like rats. Who was he fooling? He was an old man, with a half-broken horse. The world didn't hand out second chances to men like him. Still, when they arrived at the fairgrounds and Amos led Storm out of the trailer, something remarkable happened. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. People stared, not at Amos, but at Storm. The Mustang moved with a quiet, commanding presence, his silver-gray coat gleaming under the afternoon sun, his dark eyes steady and proud. Even limping slightly, he radiated a raw, unrefined beauty that made polished show horses seem almost artificial by comparison. Amos squared his shoulders and led Storm toward the registration table. The competition was a grueling test of partnership, obstacle courses, controlled movements, trust exercises designed to expose any weaknesses between horse and handler. The other contestants, younger men and women with expensive horses, sneered when they saw Amos's battered boots and Storm's makeshift halter. One young cowboy laughed outright. "You lost, old-timer," he jeered. "This ain't no petting zoo." Amos said nothing. He just patted Storm's neck and smiled. When their turn came, Amos walked to the starting line, feeling every eye boring into his back. A judge, a stern woman with a clipboard and sharp eyes, gave him a nod. "You ready?" she asked. Amos tightened his grip on the lead rope. Storm stood beside him, ears pricked forward, muscles tense but ready. "We're ready," Amos said. The course unfolded before them, a series of daunting obstacles designed to test courage and obedience. Narrow bridges, tunnels of fluttering plastic, jumps that even healthy horses balked at. Amos swallowed his fear. They moved as one. At the bridge, Storm hesitated, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar sight. Amos didn't pull or push. He simply stood beside him, hand resting lightly on his shoulder, waiting. After a long, breathless moment, Storm stepped forward, trusting Amos more than his own fear. The crowd murmured. At the tunnel, Storm shied at the whipping plastic. Amos lowered himself slightly, walking through first, speaking in low, encouraging tones. Storm followed, trembling but determined. Obstacle after obstacle, they advanced, not with speed or flash, but with a raw, undeniable bond that silenced the mockers and drew stunned admiration from the judges. By the time they approached the final jump, Amos's shirt was soaked with sweat, and Storm's sides heaved with exertion. The jump wasn't high, but for a horse that had once been broken and discarded, it might as well have been a mountain. Amos touched Storm's neck, feeling the hammering pulse beneath his hand. "You can do it," he whispered. "I believe in you." Storm gathered himself, ears flat with concentration, and launched into the air. He cleared the jump with inches to spare, landing heavily, but upright. The crowd erupted into cheers and whistles. Amos barely heard them. He threw his arms around Storm's neck, tears blurring his vision. They had done it. They had proven that broken didn't mean beaten. When the final scores were tallied, Amos and Storm stood in stunned disbelief as their names were called for first place. The prize money would be enough to save the farm, to buy time, precious, desperately needed time. As he accepted the check, Amos caught sight of the young cowboy who had mocked him earlier. The boy tipped his hat, a small, respectful gesture. Amos nodded in return, feeling no anger, only a deep, abiding peace. That evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the fairgrounds in golden light, Amos sat by Storm's side, the first real smile in years stretching across his weathered face. "You saved me, boy," he said softly, running a hand down Storm's gleaming coat. "Maybe I saved you too. But you," he choked up, laughter mixing with tears. "You gave me back something I thought was gone for good. Hope. The road ahead would still be hard. The farm would still need work, and Amos knew that life would never be as easy as it had once seemed. But he also knew, in a way he had forgotten, that some things were worth fighting for, that healing, Even the kind stitched together by a battered old man and a half-crippled Mustang was possible. As night fell, Amos leaned against the barn, Storm grazing quietly nearby, and looked up at the stars winking into life above him. The world was still broken, but so was he, and together, somehow, that made them strong. And for the first time in a long while, Amos Carter dared to dream again.